This week on Capital Connection, a one-on-one interview with the father of Sonia Massey to talk about the Safety Act and changes they want to see made to it.
I never wanted to join this club, but I'm still going to be standing with other families.
And the results for the 2024 election have been certified, and the data tells an interesting story about voters' habits.
We were surprised that election day or early voting in person really surged.
And on our Reporters Roundtable, Hannah Meisel from Capital News Illinois joins us to break down what's been happening in the trial for former House Speaker Michael Madigan. That's all coming up on Capital Connection.
From the Illinois State Capitol Rotunda, Capitol reporter Cole Henke is asking the tough questions. This is Capital Connection.
Welcome to Capital Connection. I'm Cole Henke. We start today with the Illinois assault weapons ban. The U.S. 7th Circuit Court of Appeals officially put a stop to an order from a federal judge here in Illinois from just last month. That ruling would have allowed the sale of assault weapons in the state for the first time since the Protecting Illinois Communities Act was signed into law. Now the previous ruling is on hold until the appeals court weighs in on the case. Both sides have pledged to take this to the U.S. Supreme Court if the court accepts the case. But that did not stop Attorney General Kwame Raoul from taking a victory lap, saying in a statement, quote, "The Protect Illinois Communities Act is an important tool to prevent weapons of war from being used in our schools and on our streets, and I am committed to defending its constitutionality." The Illinois State Rifle Association, on the other hand, was disappointed the law would remain in effect, saying, quote, "When this unconstitutional bill was signed by Governor Pritzker in January of 2023, we promised to see the state of Illinois in court, and we've held firm on that promise, and we won't back down until our Second Amendment rights are restored in Illinois." The Illinois State Board of Elections officially certified the results from the 2024 election, and while there are some recounts happening across the state, the data tells an interesting story about some of the bigger results, especially those who voted early. The final vote totals show a decrease in voter turnout from 2020. The state recorded just over 70%.
This year we're looking at about a 70.4% turnout. That's more in line with what we saw in 2016 and 2012, the last two non-pandemic years.
State election officials say their data does not break down the information on a partisan basis. However, while Donald Trump just got slightly more votes in Illinois than he did in 2020, Vice President Harris significantly underperformed Joe Biden. The totals also showed more people chose to vote early in person rather than voting by mail early. Both totals were not equal to 2020 numbers, but were still showing a higher trend of people choosing to vote early.
We were surprised that election day or early voting in person really surged. We had over 35% of the total vote was cast early in person during that 40-day early voting period.
And the trial for former House Speaker Michael Madigan continues in Chicago. This week, former Chicago Alderman Danny Salas officially stepped off the stand after days of questioning from both sides. We're going to have more on the trial coming up after this. We're bringing on Capital News Illinois' reporter Hannah Meisel, who's been in the courtroom since the very beginning. We'll be right back.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. Joining us now to share her expert insights on the Madigan trial that has been going on for over a month now up in Chicago. It's Hannah Meisel with Capital News Illinois. Hannah, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Cole.
So you are at the press room at the courthouse right now. You just finished up day 30. What day was it today?
I think technically today's 26th of testimony. We've been here 7 weeks of testimony, 2 weeks of jury selection before that, though. So I've permanently moved in.
Yeah, so just take me through it. Obviously, this case is incredibly intricate. We've had the court documents for so long now. We saw the way the feds were laying out their case, but it's a totally different animal for them to be laying it out in testimony and laying it out to a jury in this way. What has that been like for you, somebody who's been following this for so long?
Yeah, I mean, those indictments and pretrial motions that lay out certain evidence can only really scratch the surface. Sitting through the whole trial, the hundreds of recordings, the thousands of emails, the hours and hours of testimony from dozens of witnesses, it really just takes you inside certain moments in a way that you could never understand the nuance of just from reading. I've also, sat through 3 other related trials at this point, the so-called ComEd 4 trial last spring, or in 2023, the trial of Madigan's former chief of staff last summer, the AT&T trial a few months ago. So a lot of this Madigan trial has been repeat evidence and witnesses, but there's still just so much I've learned from a second go around. There's, people will say different things. There's different lawyers, they'll ask different questions. It's been very fascinating.
What really has stood out to you the most about this? Not the key piece of evidence, I guess, but really more so just like what are you learning the most about in this trial?
Yeah, I think I've been most struck by seeing glimpses into how government works behind the scenes. And I really mean that on 2 levels. Of course, the first is hearing conversations powerful people in Illinois politics and government, including Madigan, were having when they assumed no one else was listening. What gets a lot of their time and attention? What are they concerned about most at the end of the day? And for Madigan, of course, that was keeping his position as House Speaker and protecting those closest to him. But I've also been fascinated by the sort of breadcrumbs that have been dropped throughout the trial that explain how the Fed's investigation into Madigan unfolded. We've known for a long time that the FBI probe actually dates back to more than a decade ago, involving a real estate developer who'd been caught committing fraud. He then wore a wire on Chicago Alderman Danny Solis, and what he found was enough for the feds to request wiretaps on Solis's phone in 2014, 2015. Eventually in 2016, the FBI knocks on his door, asks him if he wants to cooperate. He spends the next 2.5 years basically working undercover, starting with recording against his colleague, powerful longtime Alderman Ed Burke, who, similar to some of the charges in the Madigan case, sought introductions from big-time real estate developers for his property tax business. It wasn't even until Solis had been cooperating for a year that the FBI even turned their focus to Madigan, who had called the alderman out of the blue and asked about a real estate project. Agents basically told Solis to set a trap, I guess, for lack of a better word. And from there, the investigation just kept advancing. At some point, the government started looking into what they'd eventually allege as bribery from ComEd and AT&T. And then they would net themselves another undercover operative in former ComEd exec Fidel Marquez.
Hannah, the really interesting part of this, we know the Fed's argument, we know the prosecution, we've been hearing the testimonies. There's a jury in that room. There's a jury of Madigan's peers that both sides are trying to win over. And when it comes to a jury trial, there's often this element of depicting the defendant a certain way. And Madigan, that's kind of been the story of his life in Illinois politics, at least. Really being painted, the nickname the Velvet Hammer comes to mind, and you start to see this depiction of this larger than life figure in Illinois politics. And I'm curious how that's kind of juxtaposed for you, and now seeing him just in the courtroom as, being a part of these proceedings. And how is the defense maybe trying to combat that image in this way?
This has been viewed in this kind of cartoon villain sort of way, larger than life. And the feds definitely leaned into that sort of image in their opening statements, whereas the defense, painted him as an everyman. Of course, he's not. No one can be in power as long as Madigan has without, certain characteristics. Madigan has talked about, many times publicly, the way that his German and Irish upbringing, shaped him as a person. He's very disciplined. He's very, he's very quiet. He speaks, or he thinks before he speaks. But the defense has been, a lot of these recordings, the tapes, the wiretaps, a lot of the Q&A from prosecutors goes like this. You'll play a tape and then the prosecutor will say, go back to the transcript and say to the witness on the stand who, most recently, most consequentially was Danny Solis, and say, what did you mean here? And, or what did you understand him to mean there? And so, Solis will say, well, this is where, I offered a bribe to Madigan and, this is where he accepted and so, but, a lot of these things, the prosecution is asking the question because, the jury is not supposed to jump to any conclusions. They're not supposed to interpret things themselves. But a lot of these tapes, it's just natural, normal conversation. Things can be left up to interpretation. So the defense seizes on that opportunity to, view things in a much, in a light that's not so sinister. And, this idea that this is just normal politics and this is just how things work. And this is just how Madigan talks. He's from a, different generation. It's been, they're really reasonable people really can interpret these things differently.
All right. Well, Hannah, I'll let you go, hopefully to get some sleep and recharge for the next week here of this trial. Again, you can find Hannah's extensive coverage on CapitalNewsIllinois.com, and she'll be continuing to turn out those daily stories. Hannah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. This week marked 5 months since Sonia Massey was shot and killed in her home by former Sangamon County Sheriff's Deputy Sean Grayson. Now, Grayson has been in jail pre-trial for that entire 5 months since he was arrested and charged with her murder. But this past week, we heard from an Illinois appellate court that Grayson should be released pre-trial with conditions. That did not go over well with the Massey family, who was here in the Capitol this week to talk about that decision and talk about some of the loopholes and misuse of the Safety Act that they say they are seeing. I sat down with Massey's father, James Wilburn, this week to talk about just that. Here's our interview. Mr. Wilburn, thank you so much for sitting down with me today.
Thank you, Cole.
I want to start here. We're talking on Thursday. Friday is going to be the 5-month anniversary of, or 5-month, anniversary of Sonia being shot and killed in her home. And I'm curious, from your perspective here, what has this 5 months been like? Has the pain and the shock of it all subsided in any way?
I think the phone calls have slowed down. People calling, but I still get that reminder. Many of my friends are in law enforcement, and they're hurting. Whenever I walk around town, it's almost like Sonia was everybody in Jefferson County, Arkansas's child. From the chief judge down to the sheriff, down to deputies, down to police officers, down to everyday citizens. They walk up and they hug me and they want to take pictures. And I'm reminded that people are still praying. And I think that's probably the only reason why I can appear as strong as I appear. Because I have those prayers and those thoughts of people who are standing with us in this great injustice.
I'm curious, when you talk about especially law enforcement, your friends in law enforcement, we just heard you speak at the Capitol here in the Rotunda, and you talked about how in your community a lot of law enforcement, a lot of the leaders in your community are black and are people of color. The appellate court comes out last Wednesday in this appeal process and decides Grayson should be released with restrictions. You get that news the night before Thanksgiving, the night before the real start of the first holiday season without Sonia. And I'm just curious, as somebody who lives out of state, who may not be familiar with all the intricacies of the Safety Act in that way, how surprised were you to know that that could just happen in this way, knowing that he's been in jail for 5 months in the lead up to this?
It was unbelievable. It was unbelievable that when John Milhiser called me personally and informed me, he said, I want you to hear this so that you won't see it on the news media or on the internet. He called me and he told me personally that this was going to occur. And I knew that he and Mary Beth, his first assistant, how hard they've worked on this matter. They did this within 10 days. Attorney Ben Crump has told me that he's had cases where they haven't even convened a grand jury in some cases. But John and Mary Beth and those guys, the Illinois State Police officers that conducted the investigation, they did all of this within 10 days. That was amazing. So, Cole, it was very amazing to me that they were talking about this man could be let out with conditions. Like, I have some conditions. If my baby gets up and walks out that cemetery, he can breathe free air like the rest of us.
The Safety Act in general, you've already said that you believe that the appellate court's interpretation of this was a bastardization of the law.
If Sean Grayson had the same skin color as me, first of all, he would have never been in 6 police departments in 3.5 years. He would have never been hired in any police department. From my time in law enforcement, it took them a whole year to do my background investigation when I was hired in the U.S. Border Patrol. There is no way. I realized that the structures have been loosened because of the inability to recruit good officers and good sheriff's deputies, but not to the level that this guy, who was kicked out of the service, who was kicked out of all these police departments, this man, there are no conditions and there are no rules that this man is going to follow. This man is a criminal. Criminals don't follow rules, Cole.
I want to shift to more the personal side of this. When you're thinking about Sonia, what's at the forefront of your mind? What do you think about when you think of her?
That's so hard. My friends and my family, they try to keep me busy so that I'm not alone. It's that time when I'm alone that I really, really meditate on our conversations that we used to have. We used to talk on the phone for hours. That's not occurring anymore. That's going to never occur anymore. But I know that I'm going to see my child again. When she said, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus, that word Jesus set him off. And that's why he's a dangerous to the people here in Springfield. He could walk by a church. He could walk by some people in the street and they name the name of Jesus. And that set this killer off again. What is the appellate court thinking? Did they not see the same film that you and I saw, that everybody in the country saw, that makes this man the killer that he is? This man is possessed in some kind of demonic way. He said what he was going to do, and he did exactly what he said he was going to do on that film. And we all saw it. We all saw it.
With all of that being said, you've already spoken about John Milhiser and the commitment that he's had, the Sangamon County State's Attorney. When it comes to the other county leadership, the Sonia Massey Commission, the leadership in this building and the leadership in D.C., the change in administration you've already brought up, how confident are you that the structures exist to affect this change? And it sounds like you're going to be there every step of the way to make sure that it ends up happening.
Oh, that's right, Cole. That's so right. I think that Governor Pritzker, Lieutenant Governor Stratton, I think that Dick Durbin, I've heard from all of them. Now, I haven't heard from them recently since this deal with the appellate court came up, but I'm almost sure in my heart that they feel the same way I do. I mean, you can ask them, I don't want to speak for them. They can speak for themselves. But I know that they saw the same film that you and I saw. And I can almost guarantee you 100% they feel the same way.
Mr. Wilburn, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
That will do it for us on this week's episode of Capital Connection. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again next week. For Capital Connection, I'm Cole Hankey.